Good evening, everybody. To all those on Zoom and to all those watching on YouTube, welcome to Mishnah Mastery. A round of applause from the audience, please. All right, we are going to get started tonight. Masechet Pesachim, chapter 7, Perek Zayin. We're going to have it up for you on the screen over there. Look at that, instant. Oh, it's amazing when technology goes to plan. And we're going to get it up for you on Zoom as well. And we are going to zoom right in to the exciting world of chapter 7. Here we go. So, we're going to be talking a lot about the Korban Pesach tonight, the actual Pesach sacrifice. We don't do it anymore because we don't have a temple, unfortunately. But back in the day, how did they do it? Let's find out. Join me as we enter the exciting world of the Pesach sacrifice, the Korban Pesach. Asks the Mishnah straight off the bat in Mishnah Aleph, the first Mishnah of chapter 7. Ketzad sonin es Pesach. What is the way to roast your Korban Pesach? If we may recall, they had to eat it roasted. They weren't allowed to do other things to it. So how do you do it? So here's what the Mishnah tells us. Mevi'in shaput shel rimon. Picture the scene, guys. They would bring a skewer. They would bring a spit of pomegranate wood. Why would they choose pomegranate wood, I hear you cry? Well, pomegranate wood is apparently very dry on the inside and on the outside. And that apparently is a good thing when preparing your Korban Pesach. So they would bring this spit of pomegranate wood. Cover your ears if you're a bit squeamish. They would shove it down its mouth until it reached its buttocks, the other end. So that is what they would do with this spit of wood. And they would put its legs and its entrails, its innards, inside it. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Haglili. These are the words of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, Kamin bishul huzer, that this is the way in which they would boil an animal. Ela tolin chutzalo. Rather, the legs would be left hanging outside of it, and that way it's not getting cooked up, I guess, by the liquids inside the animal, which would be more akin to boiling or cooking. So rather, you want the fire to reach these points, according to Rabbi Akiva, in order that it should be fully fire roasted, medium to well done, one might assume. Don't forget, they're basically eating shawarma on Seder night. We're the ones that get the cardboard. Okay, moving on to Mishnah Base. Says that, yeah.
Question.
Oh.
I thought they'd taken its entrails and everything in it out of the temple to go on the altar, to be burnt on the altar.
Okay, it's a good question. I think that's what we were saying last week, wasn't it?
Okay.
When I said you can ask questions, I didn't mean you can ask hard ones.
Oh, all right.
No, I'm joking. Where was the Mishnah that talked about it? This is the B'nai Me'ayin, the B'nai Me'av. What were they taking out to burn up on the fire? Because I think that was not necessarily the same kind of stomach innards. Was that not the fats on the inside? Yes. Mishnah Yud from chapter 5. Kara'ov Hotzi Emurav. They would take out the fats and they would put it into a basin and then they would burn that on the Mizbeach. So these would appear to be a bit more stuff that's inside the body of the animal, which does get roasted up. But thank you very much indeed for testing me there. I appreciate it. It means that at least we know that someone's on the ball there. Paying attention, that's what we like to see. All right, so Mishnah base. Ein solen es ha-Pesach lo al ha-shapud v'lo al ha-askala. We may not roast the Pesach either on a metal spit or on an askala. Askala is translated there as a grill or some kind of grate. Should not be roasted on one of these things. It should be on this pomegranate wood, as we saw before. Continues the Mishnah though. Does Rabban Gamliel? Yes, okay. Amar Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Tzadok says, Ma'aseh b'Rabban Gamliel. There was a story with Rabban Gamliel, Sha'amar Tavi Avdo, who said to his servant Tavi, very famous, this guy Tavi. We read in the Gemara in Brachas that that Rabban Gamliel mourned for his servant in a way that one is not supposed to mourn for a servant, but Tavi was a very different kind of servant. He was a very holy man. So Rabban Gamliel said to his servant Tavi, "Say utzlei lanu es Pesach ala askala." Go out and roast our Korban Pesach on a metal grate. And it seems because Rabban Gamliel holds that as long as the fire is getting through the holes in the grate, then it is going to be allowed, and the animal is going to be considered to have been roasted by the fire, rather, I believe, than being roasted or by being cooked from the heat of the metal heating up. And the reason why I think that is because in the very next part of the Mishnah we say as follows: Naga b'charsa shel tanur. If there is a bit of meat that is touching the side of an oven, so the concern here is that the oven is getting heated up and the animal is touching the side of the oven, and it's the side of the oven that's going to be roasting or cooking that part of the meat. So we're not allowed to have meat of a Korban Pesach that's being heated up by an external source. It has to be roasted by the fire. So the Mishnah says, Naga b'charsa shel tanur, if it's being heated up if it's touching this part of the oven, yiklof es l'komo, then you have to peel off this part of the animal and you have to burn it. Nataf meiratvo ala cheres v'chazar alav. What happens if some of the juice, some of the sauce from the animal, the bits that are dripping off, let's say drips off onto the cheres, onto the clay surface, and then v'chazar alav, and then somehow the moisture is then going back to the animal and impacting the quality of the cooking, of the roasting. So there you go again. You've got a bit of the animal that's being heated up and cooked by something that is not the fire. It's being cooked up from the moisture of the juice going back up onto the animal. So the Mishnah says, Yitol es mekomo, you have to take off part of the animal that's come into contact with this moisture. I have a note here that you would take the thickness of your finger and cut that amount off the animal. Notaf meiratvo ala soles. If you have some of the juice which is falling on flour, I'm not sure what the flour is doing there, but I'm wondering if it was there to as part of the surface of the area where you're cooking it up. So if the liquid gets heated because of the flour, unless it was part of the Korban, maybe the soda is part of the. Okay, not sure. If anyone's got a note there, please help me out. But if part of this juice falls onto the flour, says the Mishnah, Yikmot es mekomo, then you have to take a fistful of the flour where the liquid fell, because it is going to be asur to eat. I can't remember what the flour is doing there, and I don't have a note here to help me out. So if anyone knows, answers on a postcard and send them to Philip Waxman. Says the Mishnah. Pardon me? Oh, is that a giggle? Okay, good. Mishnah Gimel. Says the Mishnah, Sachar b'shem and Teruma. You are allowed to smear the Korban Pesach with oil of Teruma. You're actually allowed to smear it with various liquids. But why is oil of Teruma of particular importance? The reason is, the Mishnah says, Im chavuras kohanim yochelu. If it is a band of kohanim, it is a group of kohanim that have registered to eat this animal, then they will be allowed to eat the parts that have come into contact with the teruma, because they are allowed to eat teruma. But in Yisrael, so if it's a Jewish, let's not use that word. If it is a pleb group of people, right? People who are not Kohanim, right? And therefore they shouldn't be benefiting from teruma, and especially from oil of teruma, and especially from oil of teruma that has been smeared on your Korban Pesach. Says the Mishnah as follows: Im chayhu, if the animal is still raw, then yedichenu, then you can just wipe off the oil, you can wash it off, because it won't have started to absorb into the meat of the animal. The im slihu, but if it is roasted, says the Mishnah, yiklof esachitzon, then you have to scrape off the outer layer of the animal, which is where the the strongest potency of the teruma oil will have penetrated and absorbed into the flesh of the animal. So you will have to peel it off because a non-Kohen is not allowed to have it. What if you have smeared the animal with oil that was Ma'aseh Sheni? So what are you supposed to do? You're in Jerusalem, you have this Ma'aseh Sheni oil, and you have a problem. You can't redeem the oil. You're supposed to bring it in the Mikdash, bring it in the temple, or you're supposed to sell it outside of Jerusalem and use the money in Jerusalem to buy things, right? But if you've already anointed your animal and you're already in Jerusalem, then you have a problem. Says the Mishnah, Lo yasedu damim al b'nei chavura. You are going to have a sticky situation because you cannot charge the people in your group to contribute towards it. She'ein podin ma'aseh sheni b'Yerushalayim, because there can't be any kind of financial redemption going on in Jerusalem with this ma'aseh sheni. So you are going to have a problem with this. Mishnah Dalet. Chamisha devarim ba'in b'tuma ve'enon ne'echalin b'tuma. There are, let's scroll down. We are on Mishnah 4 over here. 5 things may be brought in a state of impurity, ve'enon ne'echalin b'tuma, but they may not be eaten in a state of impurity. When we say they can be brought in a state of impurity, what we mean is that the majority of the Jewish community is impure, or most of the Kohanim serving in the Beis HaMikdash are impure, or most of the vessels in the Beis HaMikdash are impure. So if you are a bit stuck because of one of those categories being majoritively impure, then there are some things that can still be brought in the Beis HaMikdash, even in a state of uncleanliness, even in a state of impurity. Says the Mishnah, what are these? Ha'omer. You are allowed to bring the Korban Ha'omer. You are allowed to bring the Korban which was brought on the 16th of Nisan, second day Pesach, which would permit consumption of any new grain, anything that was recently harvested. You'd be allowed to now eat that grain. So what they would do is they would take a fistful of the Korban Mincha, and that could still be burnt. So even though everyone was impure, or the vessels were impure, or the Kohanim were impure, you'd still be allowed to do that part of the Korban HaOmer. This continues the Mishnah, Ushtei Halechem, at the end of the Omer, where on Shavuos, when they would bring 2 loaves. So these 2 loaves would be lifted and they would be waved with 2 sheep on Shavuos. So what we're being taught here is that in a state of impurity, you'd be allowed to wave them, but you would not be allowed to eat them. So that part of the process, the waving, would still be allowed to be done, even if there is a state of impurity. But you'd not be allowed to eat them, because as the Mishnah said, you can't eat them if everyone is in a state of impurity. Continues the Mishnah, Lechem Hapanim, every single week, they had 12 loaves of bread that were kept on display in the temple. But what can you do if everyone is tameh? So normally you would burn 2 spoons of frankincense on the Mizbeach, and then the Kohanim would be allowed to eat the 12 loaves of bread, and they would replace those 12 loaves with 12 new fresh loaves. I use the word fresh cautiously because, as we know, these showbreads were on the table for a whole week and they were still fresh, even 1 week later, they were just as fresh as if they had been baked that very day, even though they were a week old. Canteen challahs seem to have the same property. They still feel very soft even towards the end of the week. So here's the thing. So if we're in a state of impurity, we can still do the process, but the loaves can't be eaten. That's the point. The Mishnah then says, number 4, Zivchei Shalmei Tzibur. Public shlamim, public peace offerings. These were also brought with 2 loaves, and the 2 loaves would ordinarily be eaten. So you can do the whole avodah, you can do the whole sacrificial process, but you don't eat them. Number 5, Seirei Rashi Chadashim, the Korban, the goats that were brought at the beginning of each month, and also the goats that were brought on every Yom Tov. So again, you'd be allowed to sacrifice them and do the whole sprinkling and all of the process that has to be done in the Beis HaMikdash, but you would not be allowed to eat them. Continues the Mishnah, Ha-Pesach sheba b'tumah, if a Korban Pesach is brought in a state of impurity, either because most of the Jewish people are impure, or because most of the Kohanim are impure, or because most of the vessels in the Beis HaMikdash are impure, so a Korban Pesach that gets brought in uncleanliness is ne'echal b'tumah, is nonetheless allowed to be eaten in tumah. If the majority of the populace is tamei, then we're still allowed to eat our Korban Pesachs. Shelo ba b'tchilato ela la'achila, because the whole point of bringing the Korban Pesach is for eating it. So since that is part and parcel of the Korban Pesach experience, and we have no other solutions, we're familiar with Pesach Sheni, that if individuals are tamei, if individuals are impure, then they will bring their Korban a month later after they've had a chance to become purified. But if the whole nation is impure, then we're taught that the Korban can still be processed and eaten as well. Mishnah, hey, nitma habasar v'achelev kayam. What if the meat of the animal has become impure, v'achelev kayam, but the fats of the animal are still pure? Meaning that the animal was pure when it was killed, but after that point somehow it became impure, but the fats were still pure. And as we were saying before, I think the fats were brought up on the altar. Is that right? Nonetheless, says the Mishnah, Eino zorik es hadam. You are not allowed to complete the process in the Beis HaMikdash of sprinkling the blood because the flesh has become defiled. Nitma hachelev v'habasar kayam. What if the fats become impure but the meat is still good? Says the Mishnah, zorik es hadam. Then the process can be completed, the blood can be sprinkled. Uvam mukdashin eino kain. When it comes to other sacrifices, that is not the case. In other sacrifices, if the meat becomes impure, but the chelev, the fats, are still good, they are still tahor, then you can go ahead, because those are the main parts of the other sacrifices, and so those would still be able to process. The blood would still be allowed to be sprinkled, but not so for Korban Pesach. Mishnah Vav. Says Mishnah, Nitma HaKahal or Rubo. What if the community, the Kahal, or the majority of the community become impure? Or Shehayu HaKohanim Tmeim, or the Kohanim become impure, VaKahal Tahorim, and the populace are still pure? Says the Mishnah, Yeyaseh B'tumah. We saw this already. And we also actually said that if the vessels are also impure, you'd still be allowed to do it. So if the majority of the populace or the Kohanim have become impure, or the vessels are impure, then the Pesach, the Korbanot Pesach are processed in a state of uncleanliness, of impurity. Nitma miut hakahal, if the minority of the populace become impure, then the pure people will bring their Korban as usual on this Pesach. And people who are impure are going to bring it a month later on Pesach Sheni. That is reiterating what we had already been aware of. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Zion, we are talking about a person who finds out after he has done the process of the Korban Pesach. After that point, he finds out that he is Tameh. So what is the story over there? If he's already sprinkled the blood, what's the story? Is it still kosher? If it is, does he have to bring another one? Does he have to do Pesach Sheni because he's now impure? What does he have to do? Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Zion, HaPesach Shenizrak Damo, a Korban Pesach who has had the blood sprinkled already, Va'achar Kach Nodeshu Tameh, and then after that he finds out that he was Tameh. What does he do? Says the Mishnah Hatzitz Meratzeh. What is the sitz? The sitz was the golden plate. It calls it here the frontlet. The golden flat golden sheet that was part of the Kohen Gadol's turban, which had the words Kadosh LaHashem, Kodesh LaHashem, Kadosh LaHashem, holy to Hashem. So the tzitz meratzeh, it's as if it's a phrase that basically means the process is considered to have been completed. The atonement is achieved. The tzitz, as it were, takes on whatever this may mean. The tzitz, the frontlet, takes on the burden or the responsibility of the process, and so no more action is required. It all gets laid on the tzitz. It's a phrase that's used a few times to indicate that I guess you could say that we let it slide. The owner has done as much as he possibly could, and fate has forced his hand, and so we have this phrase of hatzitz meratzeh, that the process is considered to have been achieved. Says the Mishnah, nitma haguf. Sorry, so that is if the flesh becomes tameh. My apologies. If the meat, if the Korban Pesach we find out after has become impure, then it's considered as if it's done. Nitma haguf, if the person becomes tameh, ein hatzitz meratzeh, then the process is not considered to have been achieved. And so what? And so the guy will need to do a Pesach Sheni. Where is the kind of support for this? Mipnei she'amru, because the sages have said, Hanazir va'oseh Pesach hatzitz meratzeh al tumas hadam ve'ein hatzitz meratzeh al tumas haguf. With regards to a Nazir who had thought that he had finished his process, but he hadn't. He finds out afterwards that he was tameh. So if it was his Korban Pesach that was tameh, then it will be considered as if he has finished the process. But if it was tumas haguf, if he was tameh, then the Nazir is not considered to have finished his Nazirism. He will have to start his count again. And that's on account of his body being impure, not on account of the animal being impure. Says the Mishnah, Nitma tumas hatohom. What if a person has been defiled by impurity of the deep, of hidden impurity? What is this? This is a buried corpse which nobody knew was there. And when they find out, they announce on the news, the 9 o'clock news, we discovered that there is a body buried in this place, this field over here, and this guy is seeing that, and he was like, oh my gosh, I was there today. I must be impure because I was in contact with this hidden burial plot. So if he finds out after all of this, right, so he's gone through the whole process and everything has been, the Korban Pesach has been sacrificed and sprinkled and all of the rest of it. Then he finds out that this burial plot is actually containing a buried corpse, and so he should have been tameh. Then the Mishnah says hatzitz meratzeh, and the sitz is going to atone. The sitz is going to take the responsibility of this process. If not, then he would need to bring a Pesach Sheni sacrifice 1 month later. All right, moving on to Mishnah Ches. If a Korban Pesach becomes invalidated, so what do we do with it? How do we get rid of the animal? Says the Mishnah, Nitma Shalem or Rubo. If all or most of the Korban Pesach becomes impure, says the Mishnah, Surfin oso lifnei habira me'atze hamarocha. So then you burn it in front of the bira, in front of the wood pile in the Beis Hamikdash, me'atze hamarocha, with wood from the altar, from the pile, the wood pile. All right. Nitma mi'uto, if only part of it became impure, says the Mishnah, v'hanosar, or parts of the Korban Pesach which were left over, nosar, meaning they were still around after the time for consuming the Korban Pesach had elapsed. There was a time frame to be able to eat it, and if you've got leftovers after that, then that is known as nosar, the remainder. Says the Mishnah, sarfin oso b'chatzrosehen, you would burn them up in your own courtyards, or al gago sehen me'atze atzman, or you would burn it up on your roof using your own wood. You're not allowed to hold on to it. It's got to be burnt up. Hatzai kanin, stingy people, misers as it translates it there, sorfin oso lifnei abira, they would burn it up on Har Habayis, on the Temple Mount, bishvil lehanos me'atze hamarecha, in order that they basically don't have to worry about where to get the wood from. So they would use the wood of the ma'aracha, of the wood pile and the altar, to be able to burn up these remnants, either these impure pieces of meat or these leftover pieces of meat. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Test, when should you burn it? Generally, you can't burn on Shabbos or Yom Tov, so what are you supposed to do? Says the Mishnah, HaPesach sheyatza, if you have bits of the Korban Pesach that have come out of Yerushalayim on the 14th of Nisan, so they're not allowed to take a Korban Pesach outside of Yerushalayim, but what if you do? So Pesach, Korban Pesach sheyatza, Pesach that comes out of the walls of Yerushalayim, or shenitma, or they become tamei, yisarif miyad. The first position in the Mishnah says you have to burn them up immediately. Nitmeu habalim or shemesu. What if the owners get defiled or the owners die? What are you supposed to do then? To ubat surasa. Then you have to let time invalidate it. How does it translate it there? Its form must change. It's a phrase that means we let the time elapse. We let the clock, so to speak, run out. So nothing happens, nothing gets done with the Korban Pesach, but once the time runs out, then its form changes. It becomes nosar now. It becomes a Korban Pesach which can't be used. So at that point, the Yisarif b'shisha asar. So then you burn it up on the 16th of Nisan. So we're not getting any use out of it. We're not getting any benefit out of it. We're just chucking it on the wood to burn through. But you have to wait until the 16th, because you wouldn't, according to this position in the Mishnah, be allowed to burn it up on Yom Tov. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka Omer, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says, Af ze yisarif miyad. Even this you'd be allowed to burn up immediately, lefi she'en lo ochlin, because you know that nobody can eat it, and so you would burn it up straight away. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Yud, in Mishnah 10, Hatzamos, the bones which we're not allowed to eat and to consume, and not only that, but the Torah says quite clearly that you're not allowed to break open the bones to be able to suck out the marrow inside of them. So the bones which are going to be left over after a Korban Pesach, v'hagidin, and the sinews which you can't eat, v'hanosa, and any bits that are remaining, that are left over, yisarfu b'shisha asar, they should be burnt up on the 16th, because again, you can't burn them up on the Yom Tov. Chal shisha asar lios b'Shabbos, if the 16th falls on Shabbos, yisarfu b'shiva asar, then you have to wait till after Shabbos to burn them up, because you can't burn them up on Shabbos. Lefi she'ein andochin lo yis Shabbos v'lo yis Yom Tov, because the requirement to burn up these remnants of the Korban Pesach can't override Shabbos, and they can't override Yom Tov either. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Yud Aleph, in Mishnah 11, Kol ha'ne'echal b'shar gadol, everything which can be eaten of a full-grown ox, may be eaten of a tender goat, meaning there has to be enough meat for everyone to get a kazayas, to be able to eat this animal. So anything that can be eaten, quantity-wise, I believe, of the full-grown ox can be eaten of a tender 1-year-old goat. And that includes, I have it translated here as the shoulders, but it translates it on the screen as the forelegs, and the has chusin, which I translate here as the inside of the ears. It translates it on the screen there as the cartilages. So anything that would be eaten from a large ox could be eaten from a tender 1-year-old goat for Korban Pesach as well. Says the Mishnah, Hashova esa etzem ba Pesach hatahar. If you break a bone of a Korban Pesach which is pure, which you're not allowed to do, harezeh lo ke'arbaim, then that person could be punished with 40 lashes. Aval hamoseh batahar, but if a person leaves over flesh of a Korban Pesach which is tahar, v'hashova batame, or you break a bone of an unclean, impure animal, then you are not going to be violating the biblical prohibition to the letter of the law, and so so you're not going to be liable for 40 lashes. Was someone about to ask a question? No. All right then. Let's move on to Mishnah Yud Beis. This is a long chapter. We're nearly at the end of it. Okay. One second, sorry. There we go. All right. Let's just put my phone on silent so it doesn't get disturbed again. Okay, says the Mishnah. We're talking about a Korban Pesach, and we've talked before about how it has to be designated amongst a group of people. And once it is designated for a group of people, it becomes forbidden to take out of that house. Says the Mishnah, Aver sheyatsa miksaso. If part of a limb goes outside, chosech ad shemagia le'etzem. So then you have to cut it off until you reach the bone. V'kolef ad shemagia le'perek, and then you have to strip it away until you reach the joint, and then the chosech, and then you have to cut it off because this limb has gone outside of the house. So you can't just chop it all off with a knife because you might come to break the bone. So there has to be a bit of delicate surgery performed to make sure that you are not dismembering the animal in a way that would be inappropriate with the other laws of the Korban Pesach. Continues the Mishnah over Mukdashim when it comes to other Korbanos, who may be taken out of Yerushalayim, but perhaps only part of the limb has gone out of Yerushalayim. Kotses v'kotves, and you can just chop it off with a hatchet, with a large knife. She'ein bo mishum shviras ha'etzem, because you don't have a separate prohibition, a separate problem of breaking the bone. Min ha'agaf v'lifnim kelifnim. If it's at the threshold of the doorway, so if you are on the inner half of the threshold, it's considered kelifnim. It's considered as if it's still inside the house. Min ha'agaf v'lachutz, if it's at the threshold, at the doorway, and facing outside, the outer half of the doorstep, then klachutz, and it's considered to be outside, in which case you would have to cut that limb off. Hacholonos, what about the windows, the ovi achoma, and the thickness of the wall? All of these dimensions, all of these parts of the house, kalifnim, considered to be inside the house. So if a limb was to be taken to that extremity of the house, it won't be needing to be chopped off. Says the Mishnah Yud Gimel, if you've got two groups of people who are eating their Korban Pesachs in one house, what should they do? Then this group should turn and face one way and eat, and the other company should face the other way and eat. And you should have the water canister that was used to dilute their wine. So the mecham, what they call here the boiler, That would be in the middle of the room, separating between the two companies. And if there is a servant, a Jewish servant, who is having to mix the wine and serve both groups, so what should he do? Kofetz etz piv, he should close his mouth, u'machazer es panav, and he should turn his face away from the company, from the group that he's not sitting with, ad shemagia etzel chaburasa va'ochel, until he gets back to his own group and can continue eating with them, because he can only be allocated to one of the groups, but he might be able to serve both of the groups. Finishes the perek. V'hakala, what about a bride? What should she do? Hofeches paneha va'ocheles, she should turn her face away as well from the other group and eat with the group that she is allocated to. Mazel tov, everyone, on finishing perek zayin. Let's plow through perek ches, chapter 8. Where are my notes? Over here. Okay. Perek ches. The first mission is going to be dealing with who is automatically assumed to be part of your chabura, to be part of your group. Are we able to just designate people if they are not aware of it or if they have not asked for it? So let's have a look. Ha'isha, a woman, a wife, bisman shehi bebeis bala, if she is in her husband's house, shachat aleha bala v'shachat aleha aviha. So her husband, and slaughtered on her behalf, and her father has also slaughtered on her behalf. So they're all having Pesach together, but perhaps in different companies. What should they do? What should she do? Tochal Mishel Bala. She should eat within the company of her husband, even if her father had gone ahead and slaughtered, having her in mind to be part of his group. What if they've gone to spend the first Pesach as a married couple, and they've gone to spend it in her father's house? Shachat aleha aviha v'shachat aleha bala. If the father slaughters on her behalf, and the husband slaughters on her behalf, and for whatever reason they're sitting in separate companies, so who should she choose? Says the Mishnah, Tochal b'makom shehi rotza. She gets to choose which company to go in. What would you do in that situation, guys? You got your husband that you've just got married to, and you got your father. Who are you going to choose? Someone's going to get upset, that's for sure. Says the Mishnah.
She better choose me.
But that's right. She better choose you. Right. Yasom sheshachatu alav apotropsin. If you have an orphan who is being, who has custodians appointed over him, and you have these. It could be, let's just call it for the example's sake. You have two custodians who are appointed over the welfare of this orphan, and both of them have intended to include the orphan as part of their group. So what should this orphan do? So the Mishnah says, so then the orphan should choose which group to go along with, and that's the final call. Eved shel shnei shutafin. If you have a servant who is owned by partners, he is jointly owned, lo yochal mishel shneim, then he may not eat from either of them, because both of these partners have a legitimate claim over which company he should be placed into. Misha chetzio eved v'chetzio ben chorin. If you have a unique situation where the servant was owned by partners and one of the partners has released him from his employ, so now he is half free and half a slave. So the Mishnah says, Lo yachal mishel rabo. He is not automatically included in his master's company, because he is also half free. So therefore, he would have to agree to be put into the group of his half a master, because he also has this element of freedom associated with him as well. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah base, Ha'omer la'avdo, a person, an owner, a slave owner who says to his slave, say, Ushchot alai es Pesach. Please go out for me, go and get my Korban Pesach and slaughter it on my behalf. Process it for me, go and sort this out for me. I can't get to the shops and I can't get to the Beis HaMikdash. Please go and do it. So what's the problem over here? He's not necessarily given him much more instruction than that. So the slave is not sure what kind of Korban Pesach he's supposed to be coming back with. So the Mishnah says, Shochat Gedi Yochal, Shochat Taleh Yochal. The servant basically gets the choice. If he goes and he gets a Gedi, if he goes and he gets a kid, a goat, then that's what they're going to be eating for dinner. Shochat Taleh, if he goes and he gets a lamb, then that is what they're going to be eating for dinner. Shochat Gedi v'Taleh, what if he thinks, I'll err on the side of caution, I'll go and get one of each. And then the master can decide. So he goes and he processes a goat and also a lamb. Yochal min harishon. Then they will be forced to eat from the first one that he processed. Shachach ma amar la rabba. What if he forgets what his master had said to him? He said, go out and get me a lamb. But he gets to the shops and he thinks, oh crumbs, was it a lamb or was it a kid that he wanted? I can't remember. Ketzad yaseh. What should he do? Yishchot taleh ugudi. He should slaughter one of each. V'yomar. And then he should make a declaration. In Gedi Yomar li Rabbi, if my owner has told me to go and process a kid, Gedi shelo v'taleh sheli, then the goat shall belong to him and the lamb shall belong to me. V'im taleh omar li, and if he told me to go and slaughter a lamb, then v'im taleh omar li Rabbi, if my master has told me to go and slaughter a lamb, hataleh shelo, then the lamb's going to be belonging to him as his Korban Pesach. V'gedi sheli, and this will be my Korban Pesach. Shochach rabba ma amalo. What if the master has forgotten what he said to him? So he comes back, and the guy's like, wait, did I ask you for a lamb or did I ask you for a kid? I can't even remember now. So what do you do then? Says the Mishnah, they both get sent out for burning. They have to be burnt on the 16th, like we were learning about in the last parak. They don't even have to give a second Pesach a month later because they've at least tried to discharge their obligation and fulfill their requirements. And even though they can't now consume the Korban Pesach because there's this uncertainty, they don't have to bring one a month later. Says the Mishnah, Ha'omer levanav, if the father says to his sons, he's got a couple of sons and is sending them out to sort out the Korban Pesach, and he says to them, Hareini shochet es ha-Pesach al mi sheyala nikem rishon Yerushalayim. Whoever gets to Yerushalayim first, you're going to be in charge of sorting out our Korban Pesach this year. So they race off to Jerusalem. As soon as the first winner gets his head and most of his body into the threshold of Yerushalayim, he is going to appropriate the Korban Pesach. He is going to be the one to take responsibility. And not only that, but his brother is going to be schlepped in to whatever he ends up deciding. He is going to be brought into the Chabura with the first son. You can keep adding people onto your group as long as there's going to be enough meat to go around, as long as there will be a kazayas, an olives bulk for each and every single person that's appointed into your group. People can be appointed and they can withdraw themselves. They can withdraw themselves from the Korban Pesach ad sheyishchot. So if you're not sure, should I go to the Waxmans, should I go to the Allens, or I'm not sure who to go to for Yom Tov, you can keep switching between them until the moment when the animal has been slaughtered. At that point, if you are in a group, you are stuck in that group. Rabbi Shimon says, ad sheyizrok alav es adam. You can actually keep withdrawing and jumping around from camp to camp until the blood has been sprinkled. But once that's happened, then says Rabbi Shimon, you are stuck. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Daled, Hamamane imo acherim bechelko. If you register other people to go along with your Korban Pesach, Rashayim b'nei chabur liten lo es shelo. So then the members of the group are allowed to give him his portion, v'hu ochel mishelo, and he is allowed to eat his portion, v'hein ochlim mishelahem, and they are able to eat from their portion. So it can essentially create a second chabur where they're not necessarily eating together, but he is dividing up parts of another Korban Pesach that is going to be divided up amongst different members of the group. Mishnah, hey, this one is going to get a little bit tricky, but I'll do my very, very best to explain it. The basic principle is for Mishnah, hey, that if you are going to be pure, if you're going to be tahor, by the time it comes to eat the Korban Pesach, then you are allowed to be joined and combined with a group, even though when they're doing that, when they're articulating, that guy is going to be part of our group, he is still impure. So as long as he's going to get to Seder night and he is going to be pure by the time that happens, he can be joined into a chabura, into a group for eating the Korban Pesach. So with that in mind, let's give this a go. Zav Shara Shtei Re'iyos. We have a Zav, which is a classification of an individual who is experiencing rather unpleasant discharges from his nether regions. So this is not the same as a person who might have a seminal discharge. There is such a thing as a Zav, which is some kind, I don't even know what this looks like or what it is exactly, but I wonder if when I say the word gonorrheal discharge, that has any relevance and that makes any sense when we talk about a Zav. But it's some kind of discharge that is being seen coming out from his member, right? And if he has 3 sightings of this particular kind of discharge, he is going to be impure for a considerable amount of time. He's going to be, I believe, he's going to be impure for an extra week after the sighting of the third sighting. So if he has at this point only seen 2 sightings of this discharge, then shochatin alav bashvi'i, then they can slaughter a korban pesach on his behalf, because if it's his 7th day of his period of time in which he is being considered to be impure, then as long as he's going to reach the end of his impurity by the time they sit down to eat the Korban Pesach, then they can slaughter on his behalf. Ra'ash shalosh, if he has seen 3 instances of this discharge, then shachatin alav b'shmini shelo. Then as long as the 8th day, which is when the night after he's gone through all of his purification process, so as long as he is going to be reaching that 8th day on the night of Pesach, then they can sacrifice on his behalf. If he's going to be impure, though, then they won't be able to sacrifice on his behalf, and he will have to bring it on Pesach Sheni. Shomeres Yom Keneged Yom. If you have a woman who is tameh for a day because she has had 1 sighting of menstrual blood, then shochatin aleh b'sheni shela. So as long as she's going to be pure on her 2nd day, by the time it's time to sit and eat the Korban Pesach, she can be included. Ra'asa shnei yamim shochatin aleh b'shlishi. If she has 2 sightings, 2 discharges, then she is going to be able to be part of the group as long as she is reaching a point of purity by her 3rd day. And if she is a Zav, if she has had these discharges, then as long as she is reaching a point of purity on her 8th day, the day on which they sit down to eat the Korban Pesach, then she can be combined and included as well. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Vav. We're going to see a concept over here that people can be a part of a group, even if there's a doubt as to whether they're actually going to get to sit at the table or whatever, sit in the same room as everyone else eating their Korban Pesach. So, ha'onen, if you have a person who is an onen, they have lost a close relative, that relative is going to be buried before Yom Tov, but before the relative is buried, they have a status of onen, they're not allowed to do any mitzvot. So they are being allocated to a group when they might not be able to eat, because if the body had not been buried, then they would not be allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. But there's a suffix, there's a doubt, and so in this doubtful time, you're allowed to allocate that person to be part of the group. Someone who is searching through a heap of stones, and they may encounter a dead body under the rubble. Let's say a building collapsed, and this person's run off to go try and search for survivors. So you can allocate that person to your group, even though there's a chance that they're going to become impure from finding a dead body under the rubble. Continues the Mishnah. Similarly, a person who is scheduled for release from prison, on Erev Yom Tov. So by the time he gets to the actual Seder, he's going to be there to eat. But at this point, he is imprisoned. If you have a sick person and an elderly person who at this point in the day are able to eat a kazayas, it might be that later they can't because they're not feeling well. Nonetheless, the Mishnah says, shachatin alein, you can slaughter on their behalf. Says the Mishnah, al kulan ein shachatin alein b'fnei atzman. For if these were individuals who are going to be having a Korban Pesach on their own, if they were the only members of the Chabura, people that were searching for survivors, or people who were in aninus, or people who were sick or elderly, if they were the entire construct of the group, then you would not be allowed to slaughter on their behalf. Shema yaviu es Pesach lidei psul, because then you might get into a situation where the Korban Pesach is being brought invalidly, because it doesn't have any people that can eat it. Leficha, im eira bahem pasul, if in an instance of these people who have been allocated a place, but they become unable to take part in the Korban Pesach, patur milasos Pesach sheni. They're going to be exempt from bringing a Pesach sheni. So somebody who's coming out of prison and at the very last minute they say, actually, we're going to keep you in a day longer, or whatever it is. They have the sentence extended. They are not going to be needing to bring a Pesach sheni. With the exception of someone looking through the rubble, because that person, if he was to find a dead body, he is going to be retroactively impure, and so it was as if he was never part of the Chabur in the first place. Mishnah Zayin. Oh, yeah.
What you said about a prisoner.
Yeah.
Who was in prison.
Yeah.
Will be able to share a Pesach.
Well, my guess is what we're talking about being imprisoned by non-Jews, so he's not necessarily going to have the option of having a Korban Pesach. Whether halachically a person who is imprisoned, that would be my. I think that's the implication. I think they've been imprisoned by non-Jews, and so there's not going to be an option for them to have a Korban Pesach in their state of imprisonment. But the assumption is that when they come out, then they're going to be able to enjoy the Korban Pesach with them. That's my understanding anyway. Says the Mishnah Zayin, Ein shoichatin esa Pesach al hayachid divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you should not slaughter a Korban Pesach for one person to be able to have. Rabbi Yossi matir, but Rabbi Yossi would permit this. Even if you have a group of 100 people, but none of them are going to be able to eat a kazayas, either because they're old or they're ill or whatever it might be, if none of them are going to be able to eat a kazayas, then you can't slaughter on their behalf. And you should not make a group of women and slaves and minors. And the and are quite crucial here, because actually a group of women could make a group together, and a group of slaves could make a group together. They're just not supposed to have women and slaves and children together. And the reason why you shouldn't have the women and the slaves together is because of the immodesty of having those paired up. And a group of children wouldn't be able to have a group by themselves because they are not obligated in the mitzvah of eating a Korban Pesach. But as long as you are chayev and obligated in the mitzvah of eating Korban Pesach, which women are, and also slaves, so you can form groups of those individual categories of people on their own. Mishnah Ches. Onen Tovel v'ocheles pischol ha'erev. A person who is an onen, he is allowed to immerse in the mikveh. And then an onen, if you recall, is somebody who is waiting for a relative to be buried. So they may immerse in the mikveh, and then once nightfall comes, they can eat their Korban Pesach. Avalot the kodshim, but this is not the case with other sacrifices, and I think that's because they officially should wait till the next day. But I'm not certain of that. Hashomer al Mesa, a person who finds out about a relative who has passed away, Vahamalaket lo atzamos, or a person who is in the process of reburying or reallocating a a corpse to a different grave site, to move to a permanent grave site, let's say, says the Mishnah, Tovel v'ochel b'kodshim. So this person would be allowed to immerse and then eat sacrifices. Gersh nisgaya be'erev Pesach. Oh, what about a convert who has converted on Erev Pesach? So at the time when they're being allocated, they might not have even been Jewish yet. Beis Shammai omrim, Tovel v'ochel es pischol ha'erev. Beis Shammai say that the ger will be allowed to immerse, be a fully fledged Jew, and then eat their Korban Pesach in the nighttime. With Beis Hillel omrim, haporesh min ha'orla kaporesh min ha'kever. A person who is separated from his orla, from his foreskin, is like one who separates from a grave. And since they are in that kind of state, they're going to require a bit longer before they are in a position to be able to have their Korban Pesach. And so according to Beis Hillel, they would not be able to have their Korban Pesach that night. Mazel tov, ladies and gentlemen, on completing chapter 8. And that's all we've got time for. So thank you all very much for joining us. If you want to come and join the after party on Zoom, please do come and join us. But to everyone else watching on YouTube, I wish you a wonderful and meaningful night. Thanks for joining.